My first play by Charles Lamb. At the north end of Cross Court there yet stands a portal, of some architectural pretensions, though reduced to humble use, serving at present for an entrance to a printing office. This old doorway, if you are young, reader, you may not know was the identical pit entrance to Old Drury, Garrick's Drury, all of it that is left. I never pass it without shaking some 40 years from off my shoulders, recurring to the evening when I passed through it to see my first play. The afternoon had been wet, and the condition of our going, the elder folks and myself, was that the rain should cease. With what a beating heart did I watch from the window the puddles, from the stillness of which I was taught to prognosticate the desired cessation. I seemed to remember the last spurt, and the glee with which I ran to announce it. We went with orders which my godfather F had sent us. He kept the oil shop, now Davies, at the corner of Featherstone Building in Holborn. F was a tall, grave person, lofty in speech, and had pretensions above his rank. He associated in those days with John Palmer, the comedian, whose gait and bearing he seemed to copy, if John, which is quite as likely, did not rather borrow somewhat of his manner from my godfather. He was also known to, and visited by, Sheridan. It was to his house in Holborn that young Brinsley brought his first wife on her elopement with him from a boarding school at Bath, the beautiful Maria Linley. My parents were present over a quadrille table, when he arrived in the evening with his harmonious charge. From either of these connections, it may be inferred that my godfather could command an order for the then Drury Lane Theatre at pleasure. And, indeed, a pretty liberal issue of those cheap billets, in Brinsley's easy autograph, I have heard him say was the sole remuneration which he had received for many years, nightly illumination of the orchestra and various avenues of that theatre, and he was content it should be so. The honor of Sheridan's familiarity, or supposed familiarity, was better to my godfather than money. F was the most gentlemanly of oilmen, grandiloquent yet courteous. His delivery of the commonest matters of fact was Ciceronian. He had two Latin words almost constantly in his mouth. How odd sounds Latin from an old man's lips, which my better knowledge since has enabled me to correct. In strict pronunciation, they should have been sounded vice versa. But in those young years, they impressed me with more awe than they would now do. Read aright from Seneca or Varro in his own peculiar pronunciation, monosyllabically elaborated or anglicized into something like verse. By an imposing manner and the help of these distorted syllables, he climbed, but that was little to the highest parochial honors which St. Andrews has to bestow. He is dead, and thus much I thought due to his memory, both for my first orders, little wondrous talismans, slight keys and insignificant to outward sight, but opening to me more than Arabian paradises. And moreover, that by his testamentary beneficence I came into possession of the only landed property which I could ever call my own, situate near the roadway village of Pleasant Puckeridge, in Hertfordshire. When I journeyed down to take possession, and planted foot on my own ground, the stately habits of the donor descended upon me, and I strode, shall I confess the vanity, with larger paces over my allotment of 3/4 of an acre, with its commodious mansion in the midst, with the feeling of an English freeholder that all betwixt sky and centre was my own. The estate has passed into more prudent hands, and nothing but an agrarian can restore it. In those days were pit orders, beshrew the uncomfortable manager who abolished them. With one of these we went. I remember the waiting at the door, not that which is left, but between that and an inner door in shelter. Oh, when shall I be such an expectant again? With the cry of nonpareils, an indispensable playhouse accompaniment in those days. As near as I can recollect, the fashionable pronunciation of the theatrical fruiteresses then was, chase some oranges, chase some nonpareils, chase a bill of the play, chase pro chuse. But when we got in, and I beheld the green curtain that veiled a heaven to my imagination, which was soon to be disclosed, the breathless anticipations I endured. I had seen something like it in the plate prefixed to Troilus and Cressida, in Rowe's Shakespeare, the tent scene with Diomed, and a sight of that plate can always bring back in a measure the feeling of that evening. The boxes at that time, full of well-dressed women of quality, projected over the pit, and the pilasters reaching down were adorned with a glistering substance, I know not what under glass as it seemed, resembling a homely fancy. But I judged it to be sugar candy, yet, to my raised imagination, divested of its homelier qualities, it appeared a glorified candy. The orchestra lights at length arose, those fair auroras. Once the bell sounded, it was to ring out yet once again, and, incapable of the anticipation, I reposed my shut eyes in a sort of resignation upon the maternal lap. It rang the second time. The curtain drew up, I was not past 6 years old, and the play was Artaxerxes. I had dabbled a little in the universal history, the ancient part of it, and here was the court of Persia. It was being admitted to a sight of the past. I took no proper interest in the action going on, for I understood not its import, but I heard the word Darius and I was in the midst of Daniel. All feeling was absorbed in vision. Gorgeous vests, gardens, palaces, princesses passed before me, I knew not players. I was in Persepolis for the time, and the burning idol of their devotion almost converted me into a worshipper. I was awestruck, and believed those significations to be something more than elemental fires. It was all enchantment and a dream. No such pleasure has since visited me but in dreams. Harlequin's invasion followed, where, I remember, the transformation of the magistrates into reverend beldams seemed to me a piece of grave historic justice, and the tailor carrying his own head to be as sober a verity as the legend of St. Denis. The next play to which I was taken was The Lady of the Manor, of which, with the exception of some scenery, very faint traces are left in my memory. It was followed by a pantomime called Lun's Ghost, a satiric touch, I apprehend, upon Rich not long since dead, but to my apprehension too sincere for satire. Lun was as remote a piece of antiquity as Lud, the father of a line of harlequins, transmitting his dagger of lath, the wooden scepter, through countless ages. I saw the primeval motley come from his silent tomb in a ghastly vest of white patchwork, like the apparition of a dead rainbow. So harlequins thought I look when they are dead. My third play followed in quick succession. It was The Way of the World. I think I must have sat at it as grave as a judge, for I remember the hysteric affectations of good Lady Wishfort affected me like some solemn tragic passion. Robinson Crusoe followed, in which Crusoe, Man Friday, and the parrot were as good and authentic as in the story. The clownery and pantaloonary of these pantomimes have clean passed out of my head. I believe I no more laughed at them than at the same age I should have been disposed to laugh at the grotesque Gothic heads, seeming to me then replete with devout meaning, that gape and grin in stone around the inside of the old round church, my church of the Templars. I saw these plays in the season 1781-2, when I was from 6 to 7 years old. After the intervention of 6 or 7 other years, for at school all playgoing was inhibited, I again entered the doors of a theater. That old Artaxerxes evening had never done ringing in my fancy. I expected the same feelings to come again with the same occasion. But we differ from ourselves less at 60 and 16 than the latter does from 6. In that interval, what had I not lost? At the first period I knew nothing, understood nothing, discriminated nothing. I felt all, loved all, wondered all. Was nourished, I could not tell how. I had left the temple a devotee, and was returned a rationalist. The same things were there materially, but the emblem, the reference, was gone. The green curtain was no longer a veil, drawn between two worlds, the unfolding of which was to bring back past ages, to present a royal ghost, but a certain quantity of green baize, which was to separate the audience for a given time from certain of their fellow men who were to come forward and pretend those parts. The lights, the orchestra lights, came up a clumsy machinery. The first ring and the second ring was now but a trick of the prompter's bell, which had been, like the note of the cuckoo, a phantom of a voice, no hand seen or guessed at which ministered to its warning. The actors were men and women painted. I thought the fault was in them, but it was in myself and the alteration which those many centuries, of 6 short 12 months, had wrought in me. Perhaps it was fortunate for me that the play of the evening was but an indifferent comedy, as it gave me time to crop some unreasonable expectations, which might have interfered with the genuine emotions with which I was soon after enabled to enter upon the first appearance to me of Mrs. Siddons in Isabella. Comparison and retrospection soon yielded to the present attraction of the scene, and the theater became to me, upon a new stock, the most delightful of recreations.